This week, media lessons learned from the Charlie Hebdo attack as newsrooms around the world reflect on the consequences. 3 experts are going to weigh in. We're going to look at new advertising in early 2015 as brands become more discerning and ask for more value add. We're also going to investigate the authenticity of a music video for a well-known American rock band that is racking up the hits on YouTube. Earlier this month, on the 7th of January, 2 Islamic gunmen attacking the Paris headquarters of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, killing 12 of its staff members. The motive? Apparent outrage at the satirical depictions of Islamic leaders and the Prophet Muhammad. The phrase "Je suis Charlie" was adopted by supporters of the magazine in protest for this violation of freedom of speech, as it was called, all over the world. A few weeks on, we ask this question: what lessons have been learnt? Does the notion of satire need to be re-evaluated, and to what extent has the freedom of speech debate been eroded? Has it been changed? Mondli Makanya is with the City Press newspaper. Zakir Mayet speaks for the Media Review Network, and standing by for us in Cape Town is well-known cartoonist Jonathan Shapira. To all of you, a very warm welcome. I'm going to, Zakir, start with you if I can. It's a question to all three of you. Your individual response first. What is your takeout after this attack?
The takeout actually is quite clearly stated by Professor Noam Avram Chomsky when he says that the coverage of the Charlie Hebdo incident clearly reveals the hypocrisy of the Western world with regards to freedom of speech. I think that we have this fluffy concept of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, but we are avoiding the true questions that underpin this entire issue, and that is, if we're talking about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, then why is it that an Islamophobic agenda, a xenophobic agenda, was pushing these cartoons? We look at 2006 when the editor Felipe Val signed a 12 manifesto after publishing the Danish cartoons depicting the Prophet, peace be upon him, with a bomb in his turban, clearly Islamophobic, stating in the 12 manifesto that he is fighting Islamism, comparing it to Nazism, fascism, Stalinism, and he calls for resistance against this. The second issue is obviously, let's postulate that it is about freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Then why are there double standards for certain minorities? The Gesot Act ensures that there's no questioning of the Holocaust or the extent or whether it existed. There's also freedoms of expression violated with Giordon when he said, I feel like Charlie Shuabali. He's facing 7 years in prison for that. And the last question, and I think, Mr. Makanya, you referred to this in your article in the City Press this Sunday, is the treating of minorities, that France continues to treat its darker-skinned citizens as inferior, and that is the problem. Why are the minority Muslims not entitled to dignity?
All right, Zakir Mayet, you've started the ball rolling. Let's go to Cape Town now. Jonathan Shapira, you've been listening to that. What's your response? Hypocrisy of the Western world, a response to Islamophobia, according to Zakir Mayet. How do you see this?
I must say, Zakir, your response, I'm appalled at one thing. You haven't even expressed the slightest expression of outrage at the murderous attack. The attack was on freedom of expression. The attack was on cartooning, on satire, on aspects of secular democracy. I just would like to hear an expression of outrage at the murderous attack, which was clearly committed by people who are the extreme of the extreme, a splinter of a very, very hardline group. If you start your takeout version of what has happened with all the analysis without any expression of outrage, it really is, I think it's unbalanced in that respect. Where I would agree on the issues of the fact that the so-called secular democracy of France is unbalanced and is not, and there's clearly a lot of Islamophobia. There is clearly the rise of the right-wing parties. My sense of what the murderous attackers were trying to do was to stir up what has been described as a relatively apathetic politically population of Muslims in France, people who want to be French, who want to be ordinary citizens, to try and stir up even more of that hatred, that right-wing stuff, that xenophobia, that Islamophobia, stir that up and recruit and show that if it was Al-Qaeda, that they're still there, that they are a force to be reckoned with. It's not just ISIS now. The fact that there are these aspects of Islamophobia and so on in France doesn't make it okay in any possible respect to conduct this sort of attack, or to ignore the fact that it is an absolute outrage against freedom of expression.
Mondli Makhanya,
I want to say something else. Charlie Hebdo has done a lot of cartoons on Catholicism, and even more than they've done on Islam. So I don't think that it's balanced to say that everything is an Islamophobic agenda.
All right, Mondli Makhanya, let's get your response. First of all, two very strong positions taken by our guests here. Where do you fit into this?
Well, I just want to concur with Jonathan there about the fact that any conversation about this matter has to begin with an expression of outrage and disgust at the cold-blooded murders that happened on that day. In modern society, we should try to maximize freedoms, and particularly freedom of expression. And any move to ban freedom of expression should be wrong. It's as wrong as the banning of any drawing of the Prophet, and there are reasons, and those reasons have been explained to me. And the banning of Holocaust denialism is as wrong as the prohibition of the drawing of the Prophet.
All right, Zakir Mayet, do you feel that sense of outrage that Jonathan Shapiro has called you on?
Of course. I think that if Mr. Shapiro has done his research, if he bothered to read our press release, he would clearly see the outrage. But I think the debate has gone past that. We're now dealing with the issues. We understand that nobody can take the law into their own hands. Only Mr. Shapiro should do the research on that and then base his opinions on that. What we are discussing now are the issues that underpin the problems within France, the fraudulence of French democracy. If he's talking about Catholicism and the cartoons that were drafted by Charlie Hebdo, then why was the cartoonist Sine then kicked out of Charlie Hebdo?
I don't want to talk about political problems in France. I want to bring this back to the media dynamic if we can. Let me ask you this question. Do you believe there needs to be a rethink on satire, what to depict? Do we need to re-examine those boundaries that have been pushed by publications like Charlie Hebdo?
I think the boundaries are there. And Mr. Shapiro, in the interview with Cape Talk, stated who do we look to as the arbitrator. And the arbitrator is very clear in secular democracy, as he likes to reference. It's the right and opposite side to freedom of expression is the right to dignity. What is happening here is not that we're imposing as the Muslim world our values on satirists. We're not saying believe in the Prophet. We're not saying that you must make prayers 5 times a day or dry fast with us. What we are saying is that we have certain sensitivities, and we expect you to respect that. That is exactly what apartheid sought to do, to violate dignity. And that is why Nelson Mandela in 1962 walked into that courtroom in cultural attire to establish his identity, not for it to be mocked at.
Jonathan Shapiro, where then is that line of arbitration, that line of sensitivity? Who decides this?
Okay, first of all, I'd say I read the press release. I was talking specifically about needing to hear a sense of outrage now. That's what I wanted to hear.
Let's move on.
The line for me is a very different line. The line for me is more in line with what our Human Rights Commission and the UN Human Rights Commission consider to be speech that should actually be speech or artistic expression that should be curtailed. And I say this very often. It's the line of actual incitement to do harm or to kill a person or group of people. That, for me, is the line that really must not be crossed. And if it is crossed, that's where authorities of various kinds and all sorts of statutory bodies, monitoring bodies can come in and actually have some effect. Until that line is crossed, there's a massive grey area. And we all have different positions within that grey area. I am far more in favour of overall freedom of expression, even when I disagree very, very strongly with what somebody is saying, as long as they haven't gone past that line. The incitement to murder and the incitement to violence is coming from political groups and religious leaders, and also from some fundamentalists of various religions who attach themselves to various religious groups. That's where the violence comes from. It does not come from the cartoonists or the satirists who are expressing their freedom of expression in an imperfect society. I completely agree with the idea that the cartoonist who was fired for doing an anti-Semitic cartoon, I mean, that is inconsistent and wrong. There should be an overall allowance of religions to be satirized.
Is, as Jonathan Shapiro suggests, is incitement the line?
Yes. I think in any democracy, you should have the freedom to offend, not for the sake of it. You do not just offend for the sake of it. You make a political point, or you make a point, a societal point. Jonathan, I've worked with Jonathan on various publications, and Jonathan has drawn cartoons of the Pope inside a condom, for instance, something that is very offensive to Catholics. But he was making a certain point about the Catholic Church's view on contraception and the Catholic Church's view on AIDS prevention. He has drawn cartoons of God as a lesbian, something that many fundamentalist Christians would find very offensive. But there was a point that he was making about the acceptance of different parts of different lifestyles in society. Now, are we in a society that is predominantly Christian? Are we to now say, to draw the line and say, no, that should not happen because you are offending 80% of the population? And I think that would flow against all the values and principles of our Constitution. In a democratic society, we should aim to maximize freedoms and not shrink freedoms.
Doesn't he have a point?
If we look at and Mr. Makanya, you refer to it in your article, the rights and the Declaration of the Rights of Man in France. If you look at Article 4, it says liberty, and this would fall under liberty, the freedom to do what you want. It says everyone has the right to do anything provided it does not injure anybody else. That is what secular law states. It states the boundaries. So Mr. Shapiro's argument that there's no boundaries and it's only based on physical incitement is completely flawed. Look at South African law. Professor eNCA, who is the author and one of the leading experts in constitutional law, he defines what incitement to harm is within our own constitutional context. Incitement is yourself doing it or instructing somebody else to do it, or inspiring them, and harm is also psychological and emotional harm. That interpretation goes through into the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, where harm is the intention to be hurtful. It's not only physical harm. So Mr. Shapiro has the wrong idea of what constitutional values are. Mr. Makanya is correct in that there are certain things that are offensive. However, I ask the question, why is it that in Europe, and this case is 2006, the case of Wingrove versus the UK, where there was something that depicted Saint Teresa in a pornographic way that was banned. Now, the same thing here, Charlie Hebdo releases a cartoon depicting the prophet in the most obscene way, bent over, exposed and in the nude, with a line that says, this is where a star is born. How is that contributing
in the interest of time, Jonathan Shapiro, I'm going to ask you to respond to that very quickly.
I don't think I'm wrong on this. Of course, it is subjective, but I'm going to state the case again for allowing freedom of expression, even if you don't like it. If you think about it across the board, the number of hateful things that we see against gay people, against women, against all sorts of... There's so many things in our society which are not banned. It's important to activate against those things, to show the homophobia, to show the racism, to show if something does seem to be Islamophobic. But I'm saying the state should not act and bar these things and censor them, because that is the slippery slope to dictatorship. That's the point. And I'm saying that even some of those cartoons that Charlie Hebdo did, I didn't like. One or two of them I liked a lot. There are some things that other people have done on the Prophet and have done on the Pope and have done on Jews and have done, which I really don't like. But I'm saying unless they are transgressing in a way that can tangibly be seen to be inciting violence, they should be allowed and they should be activated against by all sorts of pressure groups.
Jonathan Shapiro, I'll take that as your final word. To both of you, gentlemen, has this attack in any way forced a rethink on this issue?
I think it has forced editors to think a lot about what goes into the media, into their publications and broadcasts. But what it has done, it has instilled a lot of fear in many decision makers in media. And what I would like to see, coming from the leadership in the Islamic community and the activists in the Islamic community, is a much greater condemnation of acts like you saw in Paris the other week.
Zakia Mayet, I'll give you the final word on that and a quick response.
The final word is this, that Mr. Shapiro, I've given him the law. That is what the law says. So he's entitled to his own viewpoint. However, I think the true issues that need to be unpacked, besides condemnation, besides everything else, is what are the true issues? There are double standards, and there's a concept that Islamophobia does not play into this. There's clearly incitement, and we have to own up to that. Right now, the Muslim world is appealing to the Western world and media at large. It's not as if we are against media, but what we are saying is that take cognizance of the other democratic value that you're ignoring. And that's
Zakir
dignity.
Mayet, I am going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. From the Media Review Network, our cartoonist Jonathan Shapiro in Cape Town, thank you. And from City Press, Mondli Makanya, appreciate your contribution. And you can continue contributing to this important discussion on our Facebook page. Next up on the program, Real or Fake? You decide, as we look at a new music video that is racking up the YouTube views.